Louisiana versus all y'all. Jarrett Roser here today with Crissy Froyd, who we'll get into. She's finished up her degree program over at the Manship School on campus at LSU, is waiting for graduation here in just a couple days, and then on to figure out what the next steps are. The last few years, she's covered a lot of different aspects, both college and professional, and really zeroed in heavily on quarterbacks and their development, and talked a lot about the quarterbacks leading up to this year's draft. And so we're going to talk a lot about that. But first, Crissy, welcome. Thanks for taking some time. And how are you doing this week?
Yeah, pretty good. A little bit busy, but a lot less busy than I was during finals week, that's for sure.
Yeah, I feel like this week for a lot of people is kind of that sweet spot of, all right, I'm done with school and I can just party for a week leading up to graduation sort of thing. And I felt like your week would probably look a lot different from a lot of students leading up to graduation, because you probably still have a lot on your plate. I know you've been hitting the job search market pretty heavily. What has your workload looked like, particularly in these days following that big NFL draft, the big NFL draft for quarterbacks this year too?
Yeah, so as soon as I finished, I had finals during the draft. And then I finished my last
Ideal.
final, yeah, just hours ahead of the last day of the draft, which was rough because, you start at like 11 o'clock in the morning and you're not really done until probably around 6 or 7 at night with the free agent signings afterward. And I'm still at USA Today, so there's a lot of stuff that just kind of goes unchanged. So I've still been very busy. So instead of school now, what's kind of taking the place of that is the job search. But I feel like it's gone well so far. But it's this weird thing because whenever you're in school, it's always like, oh, well, just until I make it to graduate. And then you kind of think about how you're going to get a job out of school, but then it becomes, I guess, a lot more real after you graduate, because then you're actually there and it's not, well, when I graduate this, you have graduated and now it's time to take the next step.
Yeah, that next step is live now. You're there.
Yeah.
How did you end up? You have kind of an interesting story of how you got to where you are overall in terms of getting to LSU, becoming a part of that Manship family, and it was something that you really kind of showed a lot of drive to get started. What stood out about LSU, and tell folks who don't know you what that journey was like for you, that process?
Yeah, so I genuinely think that if Zach Mettenberger had never played quarterback for the Titans, I probably would not be here today. Seriously. I'd probably still be showing dogs, actually, which I still do from time to time. But yeah, so we had this dual credit English class, and I was enrolled in journalism at the same time, hated journalism, had a C in journalism for the majority of the semester. But we had this 8-page essay on anything in English that we could write about. And we just so happened to be going to a Titans game that weekend. And I remember hearing all these people talking about how it's always Zach Mettenberger's fault. And I knew a decent bit about football. I didn't know everything about football, but I remember sitting there and being like, well, logically, there's no way it could be only this guy's fault. And so then I started to write about that, and I got really, really into it. And then I want to say, yeah, I made 100 on that paper. And then my teacher was like, you should try going into journalism. And it was hard transitioning because I was like an essay writer. That was my strength. And anyone who's gone from writing essays to writing articles knows that like the first like 3 or so that you do, it's very awkward, it's very hard, and it makes no sense at first. But yeah, so then I decided that I really liked it. And so I started applying to like remote outlets back whenever remote outlets didn't really even pay people. So I was unpaid for like probably 2.5 years of my career. And I covered for Fan-Sided, Campus Sports Network, SB Nation, places like that. Just those very entry-level gigs that you can start out with. And then before I knew it, the stuff that I had background in was like basically one quarterback. And so whenever you study one quarterback, you expand to see what the other Titans quarterbacks have done, what the other LSU quarterbacks have done. And then I got involved in recruiting stuff too. And a lot of our guys from Texas were going to LSU. And I had made connections with people at LSU at that point. And then after I was getting ready to finish up at community college, I realized that pretty much everyone that I knew was at LSU, and that there was nowhere else that I was going to go and be happy. And my parents were like, well, maybe you should go to Texas A&M if you're looking. They're like, it's the same thing. And I said, no, I want to go to a school that can win a championship. And they were like, well, LSU and Texas A&M have the same odds of winning a championship. No, they don't. But yeah, so that's what they were convinced of. And so I fought everyone tooth and nail on that. And then I moved here, saved up enough money from work, and then moved here and took a gap year to avoid paying out of state tuition. And then I came here, and the first, I think it was the first season. The first season I was a student while covering on the ground. I covered the season on the ground before that as well, but it was my second one on the ground, first one as a student on the ground, and they went undefeated and won the national championship. So, and then the other thing too that people would always get me for is they're like, you have this weird niche in like LSU quarterbacks. The LSU quarterbacks are always bad, like we're average. Like, why would you want to waste your time on that? Like, look at the defensive backs and wide receivers that come out of this place. And I was like, well, this is the position that I'm most comfortable with, that I started with. And then, of course, like 2 seasons into being on the ground here, I had the greatest quarterback of all time in college arguably come through. So it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, what has it been like, or when you look now at how these last couple of years have gone for you, to see you mentioned some of the criticism of, just go to A&M, don't worry about LSU, or man, LSU quarterbacks aren't good, to see some of those things fall into place, but in, I guess, the bigger picture for you to see those probably long days and frustrating days at times to get to LSU and get enrolled and now to be at a point where you're graduating and taking that next step that we talk about off into full-time professional life without the school piece. What has it been like these last couple of years, or what is it like to look at that journey and see where you are now and just sort of the progress and the big strides to this point?
Yeah, the thing that I think about the most is the last semester that I had before I came here. It was supposed to be at Kingwood, and it flooded. Like, there was like a big hurricane, and it destroyed the campus. So the closest campus to us for this one class that I needed and had to take in person, it was like the highest level math class that existed, and I barely even tested into college math. It was 50 miles away, and it was 3 times a week, and and it was an 8 a.m. So I'd wake up like 4 o'clock in the morning to start just getting myself awake and prepare to make that drive. And I remember like every waking minute was spent on learning that class, because math was never my greatest subject. And I had already signed my lease, and I told my professor, I was like, look, like I don't know what to do. Let me know all the options that I can possibly exhaust, because I am going to be in the biggest bind of my life if I fail this class. And there's a decent chance that I could, because I am no good at math. And I just imagine that, like, barely testing into math at all, and then having to take the highest level that exists in community college 50 miles away from your house at 8 o'clock in the morning. It sucked really bad. But I ended up actually making a B in it. So that's the thing that I always look back on when and you forget like how long you've actually been in college until you think back to like the early times, like, wow, that actually was a long time ago, because it goes by so fast. But yeah, I mean, it's been a really good experience being here and being on the ground, because I covered remotely for so long. And that's, as you begin the job search, like there's a lot of things that were just kind of like everyday life. It's like, oh, like I write 3 articles for USA Today every single day, and this is my life, and I travel around and go to every LSU game. And then, I mean, but whenever you move on, you realize that some of the positions that you hold are not going to pay the bills in the adult world. And some of the stuff that I do now, I think would be perfect if I made just a little bit more money. But I mean, it's a transition that you have to make. And it's weird though, because like I said, my whole life has revolved around that. And so it's not just like, okay, we're looking for a job now. We're looking for a different job now. And since my job basically is my life, a lot of things in my life are centered around my job, then it's going to be completely life-changing. So it's a weird position to be in.
Yeah, but I mean, in that story, you've overcome some big challenges or hurdles, or found your way through. So it's pretty good training for this step now. And part of your education these last couple of years outside of LSU, or the traditional academic setting, I told you I wanted to ask you about the air raid certification process that you went through, Coach Hal Mumme's air raid system, and becoming the first woman to be certified in that system. How did you decide that that was something that you wanted to take on? And again, what does it mean to have accomplished that, and then to look and see what that kind of adds to your toolkit, so to speak, moving forward in your career?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I've always been based around analysis on top of being based upon feature writing. And I feel like in journalism, you cut so deep into the analysis and you kind of like reach the bottom as far as what people are going to read outside of a very select audience. And I also would watch like just some national media outlets on TV, and this is not to talk down on anyone, but they would have like these quote unquote analytical segments that really were just so surface level to me, and I found that I wanted to get just more involved in it. And really what it came down to is I was doing a story on Anthony Gordon, and then not long after that, I also worked with KJ Costello as a quarterback that I was pushing for. Unfortunately, he is undrafted, I think still unsigned at this point. But obviously both of those guys, they're connected to Mike Leach. That's their connection. They fall under the air raid system. And I thought that it was interesting because this is a system that's not super flashy, but in theory, as long as your guys can execute and you have the right talent in place and you're distributing it to as many people as possible, there's always going to be someone open. And to me, that's fascinating to have a system where you don't rely on a one key playmaker or one workhorse running back, and that if it works and if your guy can release in time, et cetera, that you're always going to have the play's going to happen, and you're going to drive down the field really quickly. So after thinking about it for a while, I decided, this is something that I want to do more in depth. And then on the other side too, I also found that I really liked being on the field in the middle of the action, and I wanted to open up the avenue for an entry-level coaching position if I so chose to do that. And also because during COVID, I saw how badly the journalism industry suffered, and I told myself, I was like, well, if sports stick around, which they should for a very, very long time, regardless of what we go through, the football team itself is always going to exist, and the coaching staff is always going to exist. So a combination of those things just kind of led me to want to attempt the certification and just to learn more. And because I thought that as a journalist that it would help when I watch Mississippi State play now, it's so much more fun and I understand things so much better. And I feel like I can break down that team and break down other air raid teams and teams that utilize the spread with a lot of air raid concepts. I feel like I can break them down a lot better and understand what the quarterback is doing a lot better and maybe see things that other people can't. So it's been really rewarding. It was really fun for me to get deep into the X's and O's of this playbook, to really have kind of the whole playbook available to me now, and then to go out to Mississippi State and to see it in action. So it's been a very rewarding experience, and I feel like it's opened up a lot of doors for me and kind of made me a unique candidate in a way that really nobody else is.
Yeah, it's definitely different. I mean, you do not see a lot of journalists going out there and getting certified in whatever schemes, whatever sport it may be, whether it be an offensive scheme like that in football or whatever it may be. And so that's definitely something that is helpful in marketing yourself for positions, and also opens up those doors, as you mentioned, to potentially get into the coaching side.
Yeah, for sure. I actually don't think that I went through the directory. I didn't see another media member in there, but it was funny because I had a couple people after the announcement was made that I had completed it and that I was the first female. There were a couple people that had messaged me that were asking me about like taking it, like what it entailed. So I think that it would be so funny if we started seeing more journalists kind of reaching out to try to, a certification is one thing, it sets the foundation, but I think it'd be really interesting to see more journalists just attempt to become more in depth when it comes to stuff like that.
Yeah. So we're a couple days removed from that draft, and the top few picks all end up going quarterback for the first time in I think a couple decades, and heavy quarterback influence. From there, you end up with another couple in the top half of the first round alone, and a few other notables. I think I mentioned when we started out Ian Book going to the Saints. When you walked away from that, who were some players that you felt like at that position really landed in some good fits for themselves, or maybe steals at the point in the draft that the team was able to come away with them? I think we all knew Trevor Lawrence was going first, and you had that kind of key group there following soon thereafter. But in terms of some of those fits and steals and stuff of that nature, what were some of your takeaways?
Well, as far as the Trey Lance thing goes, everyone apparently is a Kyle Shanahan fit, so we'll go ahead and call him that. But it was interesting to me because I thought, and I think everybody else thought, that it was a guarantee that it was either going to be Mac Jones or Justin Fields, and everybody had a feeling it was going to be Justin Fields. I am shocked that Justin Fields fell to the Chicago Bears. I think that he's the best all-around athlete in this class. Like, whenever you want to take pure athletic ability and then pure passing ability and kind of average it out, he probably comes out to the best athlete. When it comes to Trey Lance, I think that he has the highest ceiling, and I think he has the best raw physical tools, just generally speaking. And he's a guy that, like I said, he has that high upside, but it's going to go either way. I think that he's a wild card, but obviously they believe in what they've seen from him. And as far as Mac Jones goes, I think that really it's a blessing to him to have fallen that far, because I think that Mac Jones is definitely one of the best quarterbacks in the draft. People who listen to me know that I'm not big on the flashy running ability, a guy that can be like Lamar Jackson. All respect to Lamar Jackson, but that's when I look for my ideal quarterback and what I would build an offense around, the way that I would run my offense. I don't want a guy that's running all over the place. And me and Mike Leach actually had a conversation about this one day, because whenever he gets even slightly injured, he's pretty much broken unless his passing ability is superior to his ability to run around. Seriously. But when it comes to Mac, I think that he's the quickest mental processor. I think that he has a high ability to retain information. I talked to him after the Senior Bowl, and I really put him on the spot, just straight up asked him, I said, do you think that you limit a playbook without having the same type of mobility as other quarterbacks in this class? And he said, no, if anything, I think that I actually expand it because I have a superior ability to retain information, which I thought was a very good answer. And the other thing that we went into is how he had been compared to Tom Brady, and that there were some things that just foundationally speaking, obviously he's got a lot to prove until we can really compare him to Tom Brady. But the stuff is there as far as the developmental guy who could become something like that. And so I think that it's funny that he actually did end up landing in New England. I think that he has some good people to learn from there. And I think that Bill Belichick has shown us that he can make a very, very good situation for the pure pocket passer. And I would worry that if he had landed anywhere else that was not similar to New England in scheme, that he may bring a lot to the table, but they may not build around him properly in a way that would work for a guy that is a pure pocket passer like that.
The Ian Book pick for the Saints, I think you tweeted right after that it was a good fit for them at that point in the draft, a team that is obviously moving on from its Hall of Fame quarterback in Drew Brees and now has Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill on the roster, and as the rookie out of Notre Dame. What do you like about Book, particularly as it fits into what Sean Payton and company do?
Yeah, well, one thing that I've noticed is I never viewed Drew Brees as a guy that was like running around all the time. But you think about the way that they've tried to use guys like Taysom Hill in the past, and they drafted Tommy Stevens at one point. There were guys that they liked that had a lot of athletic ability. And the thing about Ian Book is that he was early on, he was kind of in the Heisman conversation. I don't think anyone ever really took him seriously for that. He had some inconsistencies, some ups and downs at Notre Dame. He's a little bit undersized. Like he was like kind of, him and Sam were pretty much dwarfed by guys like Felipe Franks out there at the Senior Bowl. Like you really recognize how small they were. But the thing is that doesn't always affect a player. And whenever I watched Ian Book, I didn't really see it affecting him a good bit. And I think whenever you look at guys that are smaller, a lot of people like to assume things like discount their arm strength, stuff like that. I was talking to another quarterback who went undrafted, that we were talking about that because he was kind of in the same boat as far as being around that kind of 6 foot, 210 area. And he said that it comes down to all of your abilities that people kind of start to underestimate you in. And so I think that he kind of fell victim to that a little bit. But whenever I talk to the people around him, one thing they'd always note is his nimbleness his athleticism. And the thing about that, when you think about it, is those words to different people can mean different things. Some people will talk about it and really all the quarterback can do is evade pressure, maybe go get 2 or 3 yards. And it looks like a lot because they're scrambling around and it looks like they're moving around a lot, but they're really not doing a whole lot of anything. So what I look for is, can he find lanes himself, and can he be a playmaker himself with that so-called nimbleness and athleticism? And particularly on the 3rd day of the Senior Bowl, I saw him make at least, I'd say 3 to 4 big plays where he gained some substantial yardage out there. And so that proved enough to me. But on top of that, the other thing I was looking for that he showed is he was the most accurate quarterback there on that last day, or one of the most accurate quarterbacks there on that last day. And so to me, that showed that he had the complete package as far as abilities go. I think that the Saints saw that. I always had Ian Book projected a little bit higher than everybody else did. I had him at 7 in my final rankings. I think he was the 7th quarterback to go. And if not, he was very much in that ballpark. So it's good to know that other people were seeing the same things that I was. But I think that with that athleticism, that the Saints can get somebody that they can kind of use the way that they would want to use people like Taysom Hill, people like Tommy Stevens if he had worked out. But you also get a guy that has proven that he can be a good passer as well. So you don't have to worry about that, because that's the thing about these gadget players that I always worry about is, yeah, they're fun to watch. They can do a lot of things, but are they just average at so many positions, or are they truly like this amazing dual threat quarterback that can do all these other things as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be a fine line, I guess. As you turn the page to 2022, I feel like this time of every year, there's going to be a quarterback or two that people look at and say that that's probably a high draft pick next year. And then there are some other guys that over the course of that next year of competition in this upcoming fall kind of make a big, maybe not make a name for themselves initially in terms of being a college quarterback, but make a name for themselves a little bit more in terms of draft stock that people did not foresee. Are there any guys that you go into this 2021 season and you have eyes on, in a sense of somebody that if they can show this or that, you feel like they can answer some questions and really kind of skyrocket up some draft boards and be someone that we're talking about next spring that right now may not have been on the average fan's radar in that capacity quite as much?
Yeah, well, I think when you look at like top guys that are going to be toward just the very top of the draft, a lot of people have their eyes on Sam Howell and Spencer Rattler. Outside of that, I mean, it's weird because this is not a very deep quarterback class, in my opinion. Carson Strong runs the air raid in Nevada. That's somebody that I'm looking at a lot. Had very, very, very high completion percentage last year. I want to say it was somewhere around like 78%. And you literally told me on the phone, well, I think I can get it into the 80s, so I want to stay another year. And I was like, okay, that's crazy. There are so many quarterbacks I know with like 64s and 65s that would kill to have that 78. And I think a lot of people noticed who watched outside of the SEC just how successful the air raid was in Nevada. And there's a lot of guys coming back there this year. And so I think it's going to be something that's really fun to watch. And I think that he's a guy that's, I wouldn't call him totally under the radar because a lot of people are keeping him around 5 to 6 in the quarterback rankings for next year. But he's a guy that I feel like a lot of people don't know about. When I go out and talk to football people and I say Carson Strong, there's a decent amount of people that are not going to know who that is. Another guy that I've heard a lot of people talking about is Graham Mertz. That I haven't looked into him a ton, but there seems to be a lot of intrigue surrounding him. But yeah, I don't think that this is nearly as deep of a class as this one is. So, and then really, Myles Brennan could also come out. And there's a big question mark surrounding that because he was the guy before Joe Burrow came, and then he wasn't the guy. And then we go to the next year after Joe Burrow leaves, and to me, I thought that he just severely underperformed against Mississippi State for a guy that's supposedly relatively experienced at this point as far as being in the system that just learned from one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And so then he kind of started to settle in, and I thought that he got more accurate and just became a lot more aware in the pocket moving forward. But the thing is that the guys they were playing moving forward were kind of cupcake opponents. They got beat by one of them too. So, and then, I mean, then after that, you have the injury. So we still, after all these years, in my opinion, we still don't really know what Myles Brennan is. It's the craziest thing to me. But I think that Ed Ogeron made the right decision by allowing Max Johnson to take the first team reps. And I want to say Jordy Culotta had said this, is that the quarterback position is wide open. But at the same time, Ed Ogeron seems to have really made his choice. I thought that Myles did a really good job at the spring game. I thought that that was the best I personally have ever seen him look. And it was the first time that I've ever seen him really outperform the other quarterbacks in a dominant manner. So depending on how that quarterback competition shakes out and what Myles Brennan proves his ceiling could actually be, he could emerge into a guy to watch. But that's just really just something that's been intriguing to me.
I'm glad you kind of transitioned some into Myles, because I was looking at sort of here's some early thoughts on LSU guys who could be involved in that 2022 draft. And with him, it's a year where the SEC has a ton of turnover or not established names at quarterbacks. And he's a guy that had shown some things early last year and before that injury. And so now he comes into play here. And if he can beat out Max Johnson and company and win that job, suddenly you have one of the more veteran quarterbacks in the league, and in a draft that is not nearly as quarterback heavy as this past year. And so I was interested to see your thoughts on him and what he had shown you thus far, because it has been a weird, long college career for Myles Brennan. You talk about looking back at the start of college and realizing how long ago that was. For Myles, it's a little bit longer than it is for most guys.
Yeah, I mean, what I saw from him and the handful of appearances that he did make is almost every single one of them, regardless of opponent, he seemed to get very rattled in the pocket. And if a quarterback can't stand in the pocket, like, you don't really have anything. I think that he suffered from the offensive line being subpar in some of those instances. One thing I will give him is I think that he's always been very good on the deep ball. But another thing that I noticed is that he seems to get locked on one read. And so between being rattled in the pocket and being locked in on that one read, whenever things don't go well for him, it's all over his face. And he looks, just for lack of better words, that I said after the game, the Mississippi State game, that he went out there, he looked like a lost puppy. He really did. Like, there were some plays that didn't go well for him that you could just, it looked bad. Like, you could see that he just totally fell apart. Felipe Franks is another guy that whenever he's really under pressure, he just mentally there's some quarterbacks that it's written all over the place whenever things don't go as planned. So I think that he has a decent amount of mobility. I think that he does have the ability to extend plays. I think that Max John's play is better strictly in that aspect. But like I've said, there's a lot of things that we still don't know about him. If the spring game is any indication of the type of Myles Brennan that we're going to see on the field in 2021, I would say that he has made some serious strides, that he looks a lot better standing in the pocket. He's a lot more accurate than he was. And just, for lack of better words, just the put-togetherness is finally there that I never saw before. So if he wins out and he has a good season, then yeah, this is a guy that could go in the first 3 rounds. But if he doesn't win out, we're looking at a guy that might be lucky to be signed after the draft, which is crazy because I never thought that we'd be saying that about Myles Brennan.
Yeah. We don't have to wait too much longer to finally see, and we'll have, it sounds like, a full capacity Tiger Stadium back in play come this fall as we watch, whether it's Max, Myles, TJ, whoever ends up taking some snaps this fall. Crissy, I appreciate you again. I knew it was going to be a little bit busier of a week for you than probably the average student. But congratulations on everything. Again, on graduating, air raid, and certainly good luck with the job search for those next steps.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much.
You got it. Again, she's Crissy Froyd, and for Louisiana versus all y'all, Jarrett Roser. Thanks.